Hello and welcome to TVP World. You're watching the Midday Report. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. Hundreds of Polish citizens remain stranded in the Middle East as airspace restrictions disrupt flights across the region. European airlines are currently barred from flying over the United Arab Emirates, while Polish authorities and carriers work on possible repatriation options for travelers unable to return home.
Poland is going to evacuate its citizens who require medical attention from the Middle East. This was announced by the Polish Prime Minister during a high-level meeting of the Polish government on the situation of Poles stranded in the region amid the Iran-US-Israeli war. The Polish Prime Minister has said that those who need treatment or whose essential medicines are running out have the priority, but the government continues to monitor the situation and, if necessary, it will take further steps.
Within a few hours, our plane should land in Oman, where a seriously ill Polish woman is awaiting this desperately needed flight.
The Polish defense minister, who was also present at the meeting, said that there are 400 Polish soldiers stationed in various bases in various contingents across the Middle East. He said, if necessary, these assets, the people and equipment can be mobilized to assist evacuations of Polish citizens.
We have Polish military contingents in Turkey and in Iraq. Some of the soldiers are also stationed in Jordan. We have a Polish military contingent in Lebanon as part of the UN mission on the border between Lebanon and Israel.
Polish authorities have once again appealed to its citizens not to travel to the Middle East. They're saying it's difficult to predict how long this war is going to last, and therefore people should refrain from planning any travels to the Middle East in the near future. From Warsaw for TVP World,
Other European countries are also organizing evacuations. Around 200 evacuees arrived in Munich late Tuesday on a special Emirates flight carrying German tourists from Dubai. Officials say flights from Oman would resume within the next 2 days as efforts continue to bring stranded travelers back to Europe.
The relief is immense, and I think the full consequence of that will only become clear later.
You do wonder when you will be able to get home. It's more of a question of when you'll actually get home. But I felt safe.
Well, of course, the first few moments are always nerve-wracking. We had to wait another hour and a half before we finally took off. And naturally, all sorts of things were going through our heads. But in the end, everything went well. And of course, we were also monitoring the live radar to see where we were, whether we were still in dangerous airspace or not.
The CIA is reportedly considering a plan to arm Kurdish forces in an effort to trigger an uprising in Iran. The report was first published by CNN, citing sources familiar with the proposal. Kurdish armed groups have already thousands of fighters positioned along the Iran-Iraq border, mainly in Iraq's Kurdistan region. Several groups have issued statements since the start of the U.S.-Israeli campaign, hinting at possible military action and urging Iranian soldiers to defect. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps says it has been targeting Kurdish groups and announced drone strikes against their positions on Tuesday. The same day, U.S. President Donald Trump reportedly spoke with the leader of the Kurdish opposition group, and analysts say any efforts to arm Iranian Kurdish forces would likely require cooperation from authorities in Iraqi Kurdistan to allow weapons to pass through their territory. Romania's foreign minister says the escalating conflict with Iran could have wider implications for the war in Ukraine. Speaking to TVP World, Oana Tsoyo said that Tehran's ability to support Russia may now be weakened, potentially reducing the supply of Iranian-designed drones used against Ukraine.
We need to look at the implication it has also on the power that Russia has to continue the aggression that is closer to our border. And it is very clear for Romania and Poland that Russia had a strong partnership with Iran, that the drones that entered our airspace and your airspace, the Shahed drones, are based on Iranian design, partially through the years of the war, also Iranian production or technology transfer. So we do hope that we're going to see a Russia that has less support from its partners. Specifically, we do not believe Iran now can, at this moment, continue to support as it has in the past the war in Ukraine.
The Middle East is edging closer to a wider regional conflict after major U.S. and Israeli airstrikes on Iran and Lebanon triggered retaliatory attacks and led to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important oil shipping routes.
Overnight and into Wednesday morning, both Israeli and U.S. forces launched a fresh wave of strikes targeting Iranian military command centers and Hezbollah strongholds in Lebanon. In Tehran, the Israeli Defense Forces hit the headquarters of the besieged militia as part of a campaign to dismantle the Iranian regime's internal control. Plumes of smoke were seen rising over the U.S. consulate in Dubai late Tuesday night. According to U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, all personnel are accounted for. Israel has ordered the evacuation of dozens of villages in southern Lebanon as it continues to target senior members of terrorist organizations. The U.S. has now announced the goal of sinking the entire Iranian Navy.
We are also sinking the Iranian Navy, the entire Navy. Thus far, we've destroyed 17 Iranian ships, including the most operational Iranian submarine that now has a hole in its side. For decades, the Iranian regime has harassed international shipping. Today, there's not a single Iranian ship underway in the Arabian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, or Gulf of Oman, and we will not stop.
And the Sri Lankan Navy has now launched a rescue operation after the Iranian frigate Dina issued a distress call following a presumed U.S. submarine attack. Recent reports suggest that now that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been killed in a joint U.S.-Israeli strike, a 3-day funeral is planned, and some say the fallen leader's son may eventually replace him. U.S. President Donald Trump was also asked about who will replace the Ayatollah.
Right now, because you said all the people you did have in mind have been taken out. What do you think?
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So, we had some in mind from that group that is dead. And now we have another group, they may be dead also, based on reports. So I guess you have a third wave coming in. Pretty soon we're not going to know anybody.
Any leader appointed by the Iranian terrorist regime to continue leading the agenda to destroy Israel, threaten the US and the free world and the countries in the region, and oppress the Iranian people will be an unequivocal target for elimination. It does not matter what his name is or where he hides.
In Europe, the United Kingdom is deploying a warship and helicopters to bolster its presence in Cyprus, while France's nuclear-powered aircraft carrier has been ordered to move to the Mediterranean Sea by President Emmanuel Macron. Tensions are rising among NATO allies as Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has denounced the U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran as reckless and illegal and banned U.S. aircraft from using Spanish bases in the south of the country.
We must learn from history. We cannot play Russian roulette with the fate of millions of people. In short, the position of the Spanish government is summarized in 3 words: no to war.
For his part, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says the alliance is still solid.
Iran is spreading terror. This endangers our partners and all of us together. This terror is also expressed by the fact that Iran supports Russia in its war of aggression against Ukraine. We therefore share the interests of the United States and Israel that all this should come to an end at some point.
Worldwide, global energy markets are in turmoil after Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps announced it has seized full control over the strategic Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump says he has a plan for that. Both Israel and the U.S. say the fighting will continue until the situation is resolved.
Slovakia has ordered its state power grid operator to terminate an emergency electricity supply contract with Ukraine, escalating a dispute that Prime Minister Robert Fico says stems from disrupted Russian oil flows via the Druzhba pipeline. Fico warned that Bratislava may also join Hungary in blocking an EU loan to Kyiv if the pipeline issue remains unresolved.
That is the first step, and we are going to consider what will happen next. President Zelensky will push us so hard that we will join Hungary in blocking the €90 billion loan. Well, go ahead, President Zelensky, test our patience. We understand that you have a difficult job, President Zelensky, but you will not harm the national economic interests of Slovakia. Unless the position of Slovakia with the European Commission, or Hungary, Slovakia and the European Commission is coordinated, this meeting is meaningless, because President Zelensky demonstrably does not want to let the oil pass through the territory. He has absolutely no interest in the oil flowing towards the European Union.
Norway's Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide says the terms of a fair settlement for Ukraine must be defined before the war with Russia ends. In an interview with TVP World, he warned that the outcome will shape Europe's post-war security and said the continent must avoid repeating the mistakes of the World War II Yalta Agreement, which left Poland under decades of communist rule.
I think that cannot be said enough. The way a post-war era looks is defined at the end of the war, not after the war. Sadly, Poland knows that because Poland lived for 40 years in the aftermath of Yalta and the division of Europe. So don't take lightly on what's happening when a war ends. We need to make sure that there is no new Yalta agreement in Europe, that every democratic, freedom-loving country that would like to are allowed to join Western institutions, and that nobody else, read Mr. Putin, is allowed to block them from doing so. And that's important for Polish and Norwegian security and from all of us.
The green industry in Europe is getting a boost with the newly unveiled Industrial Accelerator Act. Our correspondent is in Brussels to bring us more. Susanna, what are the details and what do we know?
Good afternoon, Ben. So first and foremost, it's important to know that this latest legislation represents a vivid step that the EU is taking in order to signal to the rest of the world that it wants to be a leader when it comes to green technology, but at the same time, it is going to do so while prioritizing its own workers and industrial outputs. Now, we know that the main bases of this legislation pertains to the fact that Europe will see greater independence and sovereignty from American and Chinese imports when it comes to solar panels, potentially turbines, wind turbines, as well as any other equipment that can potentially be used for green energy generation. Now, instead, those are going to be manufactured in Europe. One of the ways in which the EU will seek to do that is primarily by cutting red tape. So, for example, seeking to allow factory build-up much quicker. But at the same time, as we said, the details have only just been unveiled. The legislation has faced multiple months of delay, so we don't necessarily know all the details surrounding its inputs just yet. We know, for example, that there isn't necessarily an agreement amongst EU member states as to how the friendly nations, that is, for example, the United Kingdom, Switzerland and Canada, should be treated in this, whether they could be potentially included in this Made in Europe clause or whether they would have to continue to lobby for this. Now, in terms of how this legislation will now be implemented and what are the next steps, we know that the ambassadors, the EU ambassadors, are going to be presented with this initiative on Friday, following which the Council of the European Union as well as the Commission will meet to discuss the latest details and the latest the developments and to agree on those, to fine-tune those latest details. And finally, based on sources that we've been speaking to, we know that the final regulation will probably go into effect by 2027. Ben?
All right, thank you. So we'll have to see how EU juggles and balances the green ambition and its industrial output. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Meanwhile, Italy has hosted a ceremony bringing together Paralympic flames from several relay routes ahead of the Milano-Cortina 2026 Paralympic Winter Games. The United Flame will now continue its journey before the opening ceremony scheduled for Friday.
The Paralympic flame was lit on February the 24th in the English village of Stoke Mandeville, widely regarded as the cradle of the Paralympic movement, before travelling to Italy and visiting several cities in preparation for Friday's opening ceremony. The build-up to the Games has been embroiled in controversy after the International Paralympic Committee cleared Russian and Belarusian athletes to compete under their national symbols, in contrast to the International Olympic Committee, which only allowed them to enter as individual neutral athletes. In response, Poland's public television broadcaster, TVP, says it will interrupt its live coverage of the opening ceremony when athletes marching under Russian and Belarusian flags come into view.
We were astonished to hear the decision of the International Paralympic Committee to allow Russians and Belarusians to represent their countries at the upcoming Winter Paralympic Games in Milan-Cortina 2026. We view this choice as a disturbing manifestation of the dilution of responsibility by Russia and Belarus for the crimes committed in Ukraine, something to which we do not and never will consent.
On Tuesday, the German Disabled Sports Association announced that the German Paralympics team had opted out of the Parade of Nations at the opening ceremony. The number of countries boycotting the opening ceremony has been growing over the past week. Germany joins 8 other countries, including Poland, Ukraine, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and the Netherlands. Elsewhere, the Ukrainian team has changed a planned uniform for the Paralympics that featured a map of the country's internationally recognized borders, as items related to national identity are forbidden. The original design featured a map of Ukraine, including all territories temporarily occupied by Russia. The 14th edition of the Winter Paralympics will take place from March the 6th to the 15th.
And my Italian is over now, so...
And that concludes our Midday Report. But for more news, update, and commentary, stay tuned to TVP World.